Welcome back to Mirror's Signal podcast. I'm your host, Josh Holleran, and today we are joined by the ADI PDI doctor, Lee Spary. In today's episode, we talk about skills, subjects, topics, and how they fit into our lessons, how we develop our learners, and prepare for our part 3 or standards check. So lots of great information in this episode. Before we get on to the episode, I'd like to talk a little bit about Talking Send with Dr. Julia Malkin, MBE. This is a project that I'm working on alongside Dr. Julia Malkin, and this is available on Patreon, and it's aimed at helping us as instructors help our neurodiverse learners. So there are a variety of collections available on there, from autism, ADHD, dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and they're just short videos, 5 to 10 minutes on average, helping you understand what's happening with your learners and how you can best help. And if you head over there on Patreon and sign up, you can use the discount code MSP25 to get 25% off your first month. So once you've finished this episode, head over there, check it out. You can also find it on Facebook. Just search for Talking Send with Dr. Julia Malkin, MBE. Any questions you've got on there, either reach out on the Facebook page or drop me a message. If you would like to reach out to me, you can find me on Facebook, or you can get me in the comment section either on YouTube or Spotify. You can also now support the show, and you would like to support me and the work that I am doing and the time that it can take to get these episodes out. You can do that through Buy Me a Coffee, and I'll leave the link in the description. You can either make a one-off payment or a monthly payment over on there. So for now, we will get on with the episode. I hope you all enjoy. Lee, welcome back. How are you?
I'm very well, Josh. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you. This is going to be a bit confusing for those that are listening to this as it goes out. We need to get it in early. I'm way ahead on the scheduling, and it's Christmas in what, 2 weeks? Less than 2 weeks?
Well, I
Just over
hope
2 weeks.
Josh has a nice Christmas. And the future listeners, I hope they've had a nice Christmas and a nice New Year.
Yes. Happy New Year, everyone. And I hope you had a great Christmas. I'm not going to pretend that I know what happened on Christmas because I'm expecting absolute chaos. So what we can do, get straight into it, because you've not been on the podcast for a while, but you was on, I think it was episode 4 that we last filmed.
Seems like a while ago. It's more than a year, isn't it? Is it 2 years?
Yeah, it will be almost 2 years, I think. Yeah.
Time. What a unforgiving mistress.
It's gone fairly quick. We're now at this point, almost 60 episodes later, and still you're winning on the views. How's that happened?
It makes me feel warm inside. I think it's because it's the best episode.
Oh, I hope no one else is listening that's been on before.
It might be a different reason, but probably not.
It's done really well. So we're aiming for the same again with this episode. So when you are listening to this, make sure you hit share, like, tell everyone about it, and see if we can get some views on there. But we've got an interesting episode lined up. We've spoke about it because you were due to come on the podcast just before I took a break a few months ago, and we discussed what we was going to talk about, and then I decided I needed a break. So the point that came up was teaching topics, teaching skills, which one, what's the difference, what should we be doing as a driving instructor? So what's your views?
I think I don't know why this is, but logic and rationale doesn't seem to come into play with us. And I was the same for a long time. For over 10 years, I taught subjects or topics, whichever, take your pick. And sometimes I wish I could go back in time. I remember when I first started doing this job, so like 2009, I would have learners who were struggling with turning left, for example, like struggling to do left turns, almost to the point where I would think about cancelling lessons out of anxiety of teaching people left turns for the first time. So that's what I remember about my first few months as an ADI, because I never went on the training license. So this was like gone from role play to real people in a day. It was just terrifying. Um, Moving off and parking up, no problem. Um, oh, side roads on the left. I used to dread it. So I'd have people curbing it, I'd have people swinging in and getting a bit lost with the hands and not steering enough around the corner and ending up on the wrong side of the road. And then there's a car coming the other way and I'm grabbing the wheel and proper anxiety. Literally, I probably did cancel lessons because people were doing left turns next. And when people used to say, "Oh, I've already done basic junctions," I'd be like, "Oh, have you? That's brilliant news." I used to absolutely hate it. And I really wish I could go back in time and sit on my back seat from 2009 and just tap myself on the shoulder and say, why are you teaching left turns when they can't bloody steer? Like, it doesn't make sense. So that's the problem, I think. We get so involved with teaching subjects and topics. And of course, PDIs are told to, and they don't really receive enough guidance, which is why I made that syllabus that we were talking about a minute ago before we started. Is to kind of guide people from how to start with a brand new learner from scratch, so you don't suffer. And quite a lot of what driving schools will do is say, "There's some PDIs, off you go. That's what you got to teach them." And it kind of comes back to haunt them when they get to like a part three because they're still focusing on subjects and topics, but the DVSA want to know what are the skills that you are working on today. So I think if we start right, so when we start teaching on the training license, we're already skill focused. Because knowledge and understanding is supposed to be the theory test, and skills is supposed to be us. That's the practical element. Obviously, we can help with the knowledge and understanding as well, but our primary role is to improve and develop skills, not to teach people subjects. But ultimately, it doesn't make any sense at all to teach subjects in which certain skills are required that we don't have yet, and that's often the problem.
So let's go back to your early days as an ADI. There's a couple of questions, but the first one I want to ask. So you're sat in the back seat, you're watching a freshly teaching his first few driving lessons, and these students happen to be on left turns. They're oversteering, understeering, they're struggling. What skills would you advise that driving instructor look at to help the student develop?
All of them. Love. I think it's about breaking down what's needed in a subject, and kind of looking at yourself in terms of and asking yourself what are the skills that are required before we do this subject. So the classic example that I often use is like, and imagine this from an examiner point of view on a standards check or a part three. You've got a learner at a T junction, and this learner is ready to emerge. And you've probably seen this fault yourself. It's very common, where they've got the biting point ready. Let's say we're in a manual car, biting point, brakes on, ready to go. And when they can go, they take off the brake and they lift the clutch that tiny bit above the biting point, and it gives them a lovely clutch control. And you're looking at that and you're thinking, nice clutch control. But of course, it's short lived, isn't it? Because when they start focusing on that big round thing in front of them, when they focus in on turning, they seem to forget about the left foot, and the left foot comes all the way up, and then they stall. And this is why a lot of people end up in trouble on their exam, because they look at that because they're so focused on topics and subjects. They're going, oh well, we've got a T junction problem here, so let's do a loop of T junctions to fix our T junction problem. but you haven't got a teaching problem. You've got a learner who can do clutch control and steering, but you've got a learner that can't pat their head and rub their belly at the same time. So you've got a coordination problem of two skills at once. Um, so if you went and did a 3-point turn for the next 10 minutes, not for the sake of doing a 3-point turn, but to develop that skill of coordinating the clutch and the steering wheel together. And then you took that person back to T junctions in 10 minutes time with their new improved skill, they'll smash them, won't they? Because they've got the skills they need. So yeah, that's what I'd say to old Lee, younger Lee, old, formerly Lee of
You'd
2009.
say formally.
2009 Lee is a think about the skills that are required and develop those first. Firstly, in isolation. So, like I said, if you've got a learner who can't do the clutch control and can't steer, it makes no sense to try and make them do both. So develop that skill and then develop that skill and then put them together and then go and do subjects where them skills are required, would be my advice.
And it makes sense. Like you said at the beginning of the episode, thinking, I think it was logically about it. And
Logic
it
and,
is really, say again.
logic and rationale. Someone said
That was
that.
it.
Someone said that to me a few weeks ago. Are you a real doctor? Like, no. But I've got a PhD in rationale and logic. It's my answer to that. But yeah, that's what it is. It's just logical thinking, which we don't use because, and I think that's the problem, is just because we've always done it a certain way doesn't make it the right way, doesn't make it the best way, doesn't make it the most efficient way. But I think that's where a lot of people fall into. The PDIs are teaching subjects because their trainer teaches subjects, and whoever taught that trainer taught subjects. So it's just what we do, isn't it? But why? That's why I'm a pain in the ass. That's why all these national driving schools have got rid of me because I ask too many bloody questions, and I always ask why to everything. Question everything is what I always say, and it's what you should always do.
I bring that into my lessons quite early, and I really enjoy it when the students get on board with it because I don't think they're used to it from school. If I'm mentioning something, they'll be like, but why? I'm like, great. And I'll tell all of my students, like, if I can't give you a why we're doing something, then there's no reason to do it. If I can't justify why we're doing it, either through the publications or through safety or through some kind of logic, then you don't need to do it. So keep asking why, question everything that I ask you to do, and it gives them the understanding. And I think that builds a good rapport with the student as well when they know they can question what we're doing and why we're saying the things we do. But going back to the topics, the part 3 marking guide, because I'm sure there's going to be some PDIs listening to this, maybe ADIs that have got a standards check coming up. And I think it's the second box down that says topic. And in that topic, I can't quote it, but I'm pretty sure there's roundabouts, junctions, traffic lights, whatever else there is on there. Do you think that can sometimes misguide people?
Yeah, but it's misguiding, and this is what we said kind of off air, is that it's not the PDI's fault, it's the people that are training these PDIs that should be making these things really clear. What I always say to people that I help with that, kind of especially lesson planning, is that that section of the form is irrelevant. In fact, the whole form is irrelevant because it's if you put it into context, it's what the DVSA give their examiners to go and mark the test with. So actually, the fact that we get to see that is just common courtesy. That's all it is. But because we get to see it, we think, oh, this section's for us. Let's pick a theme. But actually, it's just for the examiner to pigeonhole what they saw after the event. So I think it'd be wise of the DVSA, if ever they got wise, to maybe write something like for office use only on that box. Would that take long to do that? Probably not. But then they're going to argue that the whole sheet is for office use only anyway. So that's probably why they haven't done it. But yeah, I think it's our duty as trainers to make sure that PDIs know not to try and pick a theme off a box and then try to shoehorn a learner into it, because then they're going to fail.
So when you meet the examiner for your part 3 or standard check and they ask about your student and what they're going to be doing, we just need to give an answer of what that student's doing, irrelevant of that box. That's for the examiner. The part 3 standard check is about your learner on that day.
Yeah, and that's what I often say to ADIs and PDIs, that stop trying to plan it. There was something I wrote on Facebook a few days ago that was about that, where people are constantly on these groups saying, "What should I do for my part 3, and what topic should I pick?" And it's like, this is the problem with our brains. Your brain is trying to mess you up. Your brain is trying to screw you over. Because if this was a holiday or a wedding, then your brain would be going, oh, important date in the future. We must plan it. We must plan it within an inch of its life. And the part 3 is no different, because it's an important date in the future. So the brain is saying, come on, you got to plan it. You got to plan it. You got to figure out a route and figure out what you're going to do. It's like, planning your part 3 is literally like booking a hotel and a flight without knowing where you're going.
So what would you advise to do to plan for your part 3? We can't plan it. We can't plan the part 3, but how can you plan for it? How can you prepare for it, I guess, is a better word.
You can do a normal lesson with a learner, the learner that you're going to take, maybe 2 or 3 days before. And at the end of the lesson, do a debrief. What went well? What didn't go well? What are our outstanding issues? What do we need to get better at doing? Skill-wise, not roundabouts. What are our deficient skills? They are the needs for the part 3, because the part 3 is next. And then you need some goals based on them needs. So the needs are the problem, and the goals are what it looks like when we don't have that problem. And then make a little plan and go and do it. And that's all you got to do. Easy peasy. But don't plan it weeks in advance, because you don't know. You just don't know what their needs are going to be 3 weeks on Thursday, unless you've got a crystal ball. You can't possibly know. We have strayed right off topic, haven't we? We're talking about bloody standards check again. But I think
It's go on.
It's an important thing to cover that, because a lot of people will worry about that theme section. So it's good that we're getting it out there.
You tend to see it a lot on social media, and I guess social media shows the extremes of any situation. So you get people on there that really want everything planned, and then you get people like yourself that don't plan it. And as a PDI, I'd be sat there, I'd be like, well, what do I do? Do I just turn up on the day and blag it? But I think having that understanding, like you've said, is knowing your pupil, knowing what they need to improve skills wise, and then the goal is where we want to get to with those skills. I can't get my words out. And then you've got.
Sorry,
go on.
All
you
right,
go. Okay. I'm gonna have a drink.
I went to see someone a few weeks ago, and he had his proper light bulb moment about skills versus subjects. And I met him at his learner's house, and I jumped in the car, and he said, we're working on judging gaps at roundabouts today. So I'm like, right, okay. So I jumped in the back, and we did 20 minutes of judging gaps at roundabouts with prompts that did not work. It didn't work. It was a nightmare. The learner was getting really stressed. It didn't work. So we did the right thing. He adapted the plan. It's appropriate to adapt your plan when it's not working the way you're doing it. So that was good. And he adapted it to what the learner wanted, which was to be talked through it. So we've provided the learner with less challenge and more support. So he's adapted it in the right way, because it weren't working. So top mark so far. But it didn't work with instruction either for 10 minutes. And then he found himself in a bit of a pickle, because he thought, well, if instruction is the most level of help I can give someone, where do we go from here? So he adapted his instruction to instruction. and did it for another 10 minutes. And if you do what you did, you're going to get what you got. And it didn't work with prompts for 20 minutes. It didn't work for instruction for 10 minutes. And then it didn't work with instruction again for another 10 minutes. And in the end, he said to me, "Right, Lee, come on, tell me what I'm doing, what the problem is here. What would you do?" He said. And I said, "Why don't you work on it here at the side of the road?" And he looked at me like I'd literally gone mad. And he said, "That's not roundabouts." I said, "But you said you were working on judging gaps." And I said, "You can work on judging gaps at roundabouts, of course you can. But you can work on judging gaps turning right at traffic lights and turning right out at T-junctions and turning right into side roads and moving off at the side of the road on a main road with traffic coming." And that was his little light bulb. And he was like, "Oh, I never thought of it like that. I thought we were working on roundabouts." Like, no, that's a topic. It's supposed to be working on skills.
We finally brought it back. You're all right at these,
See
aren't
what I
you?
did? See what I did
It's the full job, though, I think. And we've got a question about it towards the end. But it is such a difficult job to do. And it becomes easier the longer you're doing it. Like today, the weather's been horrific. And the learner that I had this morning wanted to do rural roads, country roads. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So took her on some roads for kind of speed control, priority systems. And her driving wasn't quite at the standard that it had been. So we had a chat and she was worried about being able to stop the car in the bad weather. And I'm like, great. So we had a chat and we then threw in an emergency stop. So I was like, well, let's just do an emergency stop. She was like, why? I'm like, well, if you know you can stop the car and it will react as you expect it to, do you think you'll feel more comfortable driving and moving back to what we want to achieve out of the lesson? And she was like, yeah, okay, let's do that. So done the emergency stop, car stopped as expected. And the drive was completely different afterwards because she knew she could still control the car and what the risks were. And you can often get drawn into what they're showing as a fault, but not understanding why it's happening and being able to jump out and do it different. Like you've said there, well, do it at the side of the road, use junctions, use this, use that, remove some of the risk, control it, and move on.
It sounds like you did exactly the right thing. That's really good. Yeah, I mean, that's the and having the foresight to link that together is why it works so well. But I think sometimes people lack that foresight because they're thinking it's roundabouts today. It's like, but you were obviously thinking about skills and different scenarios where you can improve that skill and work on that issue that she had as well. So that everyone should listen to that, and that's what they should do. Listen to Josh.
But it takes a while to get there, doesn't it? Like people listening to this, we might have PDIs that are a few weeks into a PDI license. They've got a handful of students and they're listening to you say, well, just do this, just do that. And how you've got to develop your own skills and your own knowledge. And I think it comes back to what you said at the beginning, thinking kind of logically and rationally about what it is they're trying to achieve. If a student can't set the car off and steer, well, then solidify one of them, then the other one, then put them together. And when you start with that basis, it works wherever they need it to work, really. But with the skills, and we'll bring in potentially your syllabus. I don't know much about it, but I found with my learners, none of them have a set pathway from first lesson to driving test. Now, topics, in my opinion, that makes sense. You do left turns, you do right turns, you do roundabouts, you do crossroads, you do X, Y, Z. Once you've done all of these topics, go and do the driving test. Now, that's not what I follow with my learners. I don't think it works for me in the way I teach. But how do you manage that with your students if you're basing it on skills rather than topics?
Well, I mean, I'm sure there's people listening to this who are exactly this person who finds themselves spinning plates where they've got lots of stuff going on. And the reason why you've got a lot of stuff going on and you're spinning lots of plates is because you've made the learner spin a lot of plates as well. And that's often the problem. So, before we go into a topic, we should always ask ourselves three questions. Number one, do they know what they need to know? And do they understand what they need to understand? Because if they don't, if it's not going to be working on, if it's not right in their head, it's not going to be right on the road. So without even thinking about skills, we need to firstly know what we're doing and understand why we're doing it. So I'd kind of look at it first and introduce it and make sure we understand it and know it. But then you've got to sort of think, do they have the skills required? You know, I see this, I'll give you an example. Like if your learner is struggling with the clutch control and the steering, for example, but you're making them do moving off and parking up, let's say, and your learner is bashing into the curb when they're parking up, then if you're looking at that as a parking up at the side of the road problem, then you're going to do more parking up at the side of the road. But if they haven't got the skill of steering accurately, then how can you expect them to park reasonably close to the curb? So if you look at what skills are required and then build up the learner kind of brick by brick, you get to a point where you're doing, moving off at the side of the road. They already have knowledge and understanding of mirrors and blind spots. They have the ability to set the car off independently, and they can steer independently. So of course, moving off will be a subject that they can do very, very quickly and then move on to the next one, which would be parking up. And they're not going to hit the curb because they've got that steering accuracy skill in the bag. They're not going to stall because they've got the pedal control skill in the bag already. And then once you've got, and this is the problem where I think we move people on too quickly. So without really being very good at moving off and parking up, we're already looking at left turns. So we've got steering problems and we've got pedal problems, and we've got this MSPSL thing that we're trying to do as well. So you got two plates spinning. If you then move on to T junctions on the left, let's say, then you've introduced something new into the fray, which is dealing with give-way lines. So you've got that plate spinning, and you've got we can't really do MSPSL plate spinning, and you've still got the clutch and the steering problem. So you've got three plates spinning. And then by the time we get to roundabouts, we're now dealing with roundabouts. We can't emerge from junctions properly. We can't approach junctions properly. And we've got the control problems as well. And I see that all the time when I'm out on the road. Learners they just look so frightened because they haven't got the skills they need to do what they're doing, and they're sort of panicking. And if you had a learner who was walking down the high street and there was people coming everywhere, like at this time of year, busy on the high street, and they're not panicking because they can control their body. They can make it stop when they want it to stop. They can speed it up. They can move direction. Pretty confident. But put them on a road with parked cars on both sides, and now we're nervous and we're panicky. So why are we nervous and we're panicky? Because we're in a car that we can't control. We don't have the skills. If they have the confidence that they can make it do what they want it to do, which is kind of what you said with your learner, then that confidence instantly comes out because they feel confident that they can make the car do what they want it to do. So there's a lot of PDIs that will find that they're spinning a lot of plates, but that's because you're putting too much on the learner's plate in one go. If you build it up gradually, brick by brick, and transfer responsibility for each skill and then these kind of coordinations of skills, then we can start doing that with subjects as well, where we've already got the skills that we need. And then when we're doing stuff like roundabouts, then we can already give way to the right because we did that on side roads on T junctions turning left, and we've got responsibility for that. We've already turned right into side roads. We can do that independently, so we can give way to straight ahead. We can already approach junctions independently. So then you've got a learner who's doing roundabouts. They've got to give way to ahead and the right at the same time, but they've done them individually on side roads on the right and left T junctions. So they've already got that. They just have to do them in one go this time. We can already do the approach routine. We can already move off. We can already park up. We can already control the car. So then you've got your roundabout plate. and you're spinning that one thing.
As a PDI, do you think part of the concern is value for money? My student wants to be moving on, getting onto junctions, getting onto roundabouts because their mate is doing roundabouts, whatever it is. Do you think that's part of the challenge
It's a
for
massive
PDIs?
challenge. Yeah, it is. But you've got to stand by your beliefs. And if your beliefs are that your learner will learn faster than their friends because you're going to build them up brick by brick and do it properly, so their best friend is doing T junctions already, and your learner's still in a car park working on steering and pedals. So is it value for money? No, it's not. But in a few weeks' time, when your learner's doing roundabouts really well, their friend is still doing T junctions and stalling and bashing into curbs and constantly taking backward steps that are hindering their progress. If you do it right, if you build them up brick by brick, they only ever go forwards. And that means they're going to go rapid through the syllabus once they've got the skills that they need. So it takes a little bit longer at the beginning, but it's shorter in the long run. And if you believe in that, you wouldn't care.
It's difficult, I think, to see that until you've seen it. Like when you see your learners 10,
Yeah.
15 hours, whatever it is, like you say, you're building those foundations and you see other people on social media, oh, my learners are doing this by 10 hours in and they're ready for test by 12 hours, whatever it is. And you're like, well, I'm still moving off, stopping and really getting the fundamentals in. So it is a battle in the early stages, I think, because you've got this expectation that they're going to be on the road and doing all of these different topics within the first few hours.
Who sets
Having
that?
that belief.
Who sets
Go
that
on.
though? Who sets that expectation? Because from a trainer point of view, my PDIs only know this way. So they know that that's how they're going to start off. They're going to get a new learner. They're going to go to a car park, and they're going to spend 1, 2, 3 hours, developing skills. So they know that from the start. So it's not something that they worry about, or I like to think they don't. But then there's that external factor, isn't there? Where, again, like you said, social media and stuff like that. But it's, when you start having people pass, rapid fast, because they're learning in the way that they're born to learn. This is what I call the kind of Goldilocks approach to learning, where I'll give you an example. Like, let's say we're working on braking for the first time with someone that's never used the brake before. It's quite easy to try and teach them and tell them what they need to do. But this is manual dexterity. It needs to be felt. It's not something you can tell people. They have to feel it. So what I always encourage people to do is like an exercise on braking. So we go through 3 questions first. So it's not a briefing, because a briefing is completely just eradicating what they already know. It's just questions. So where is it? What does it do? How is it used? And we're talking about one thing, the brake. So do they know where it is? Do you know where the brake is? They go, it's the middle one. And you're like, how do you know that if you've lived under a rock for 17 years? I was just going to give you a briefing. But of course, they haven't been living under a rock. They've played video games. They've been passengers for years and years and years. They've talked to family and friends. They've studied for theory tests. They've watched TV shows. They're not this empty vessel that you need to fill with your amazing wisdom. So if you ask them which one's the brake, they'll probably tell you it's the middle one. And then you ask them, do you know what it's used for? And they say, well, you press it to stop and slow down, don't you? You're like, how did you know that? You lived under a rock. And then, so where is it? What does it do? How is it used? Is the last question. And they'll say, well, you just press it down, don't you? And that's where we tend to go off our head. Like, no, oh my God, no, you don't just press it down. Oh no, you've got to do it really softly, or you've got to do it really gradually, or you've got to do it really gently. But how soft is soft, or how gradual is gradual to someone that's never pressed it? So we have to feel it. It's manual dexterity. So once they know where it is, and what it does and how it's used, then just let them have a go. And this is isolation. So you would, from your side, you'd find the bike. You'd go into first, you'd find the bike, you'd do the checks, you'd take the handbrake off, you'd bring the clutch up, you'd let the car move, and you'd press the clutch back down and say, right, go on, press the brake, see what happens. And they'll press it and they'll nearly go through the window. So then we can start coaching them and starting analyzing it and setting the scene for future analysis. So why do you think the car stopped so suddenly? And the learner says, "Oh God, I think I might have pressed it too hard." Yeah, well, I'm inclined to agree. So what would be the risk of that if we had a car behind us on a road? And they go, "Oh God, he'd be straight in the back of us, wouldn't he?" So you're already developing attitude by getting to think about risk. What would you do differently if you did that again? And they say, "Oh, I'll press it a lot softer." So we run the exercise again. And this time they press it so soft that we don't even stop. So why do they think we didn't even stop? What would be the risk of not stopping when you're trying to stop? And what would you do differently if we did that again? And that's when they'll say, well, I need to press it softer than that first time, but I need to press it harder than that second time. And within 3 or 4 or 5 goes at that, they can brake. They've got a skill in the bag. Number one is there in the bag. So once we've got a learner that can brake, can we get the learner to use the clutch and the brake? Because remember, you were doing the clutch before. So then you've got a learner that can brake and a learner that can clutch and brake and stop without stalling. Can we then look at, like in a car park, you've got bay lines. You could kind of make them horizontal, if you know what I mean. So drive through them the other way. So all the lines are horizontal lines in front of you. And let's practice stopping at them lines. And if we stop too early or too late, let's figure it out. And eventually there, you've got a learner that can brake, and you've got a learner that can clutch and brake, and you've got a learner that can clutch and brake and stop bang on that line. And if they can stop bang on that line, they can stop bang on the line at a traffic light and a zebra crossing and a roundabout and all the other lines that you can think of. So building them up, where is it? What does it do? How is it used? And then experience it, because we can't teach manual dexterity. It has to be felt. So let them experience it and learn from that experience. And then that means that they'll figure out pretty much straight away that you're not there to teach them to drive. You're there to help them learn. And there's a big difference.
I wish I'd have heard those sentences before I started teaching on my own for the first time, because I had to figure that out over a long time, as I expect a lot of PDIs do. It's like, right, let's go to a car park. And you either go through what we sometimes see, all the controls, everything that students going to forget 10 minutes later. And then maybe we talk about the clutch. Or the other end, I get a student going and I'm like, well, how do we get them to stop? Because we're moving at a bit of speed now and the hedge is coming towards us.
Mm.
So I love that, so specifically breaking it down from the very beginning. And the learner just having one thing to work on. And from what I see on social media about we're gonna step towards part 3 and standards checks, it's often that they're missing fundamentals. They've not seen the mistake or why the mistakes happened. And the student's trying to do too much. As an instructor, our job's so much easier if we've just got to watch them do one thing and we've shared that responsibility out. So it's just, they've got one job. Let's make sure we do that correct.
And that's what we said earlier, that if the learner's only got a little bit on their plate, then you've only got a little bit on your plate. So this plate spinning chaos is because we've kind of moved on to subjects in which they either lack knowledge, understanding, or skill. So if you build them up brick by brick and they have that knowledge, understanding, and skill, and then you then move on to the next thing, and that's why I made the syllabus, because PDIs didn't have a definitive guide to go from lesson 1 to driving test, apart from a list of subjects. So that's why I made it, and that's why I sell a lot of them, because it doesn't exist, and even stuff like the modern stuff like Total Drive and stuff like that, is still not really broken down in enough detail. And the level of detail that PDI see is the level of detail that they think they need to teach. So if there's more detail, then they kind of get it quicker. But again, like right back what we said at the beginning, it just doesn't make sense to teach subjects if people don't have skills. And I think the problem is we used to, and we still do, and I still see a lot of this, like full instruction is, talking it through step by step, every little detail, and that's because the learner lacks one of those three things: knowledge, understanding, or skill. Because if you've got, for example, if your learner's moving off at the side of the road for the first time and they already know about mirrors and blind spots and they've already got the skills of, clutch control and all those things, then when you ask them if they need talking through it, they'll say no, because they know and they understand and they've got the skills. So of course they won't. And full instruction is really kind of like a big plaster, covering up cracks in knowledge, understanding, and skill. We only needed it before because we didn't have these things in place first. So if you get these things in place first, you'll be very surprised if your learner ever wants to talk through, because people just don't learn by being talked at. It's not what they want. It's not the way we're born to learn. We're born to learn, like we said earlier, try it, mess it up, think about it, try it again. And if you do that for everything, people learn at rapid speed and they'll learn so much quicker than those people have been pushed through it and they're already doing roundabouts on the second lesson. It's like, great, but they're going to take so many backward steps throughout the journey that your learner's going to pass so much faster anyway.
It's not easy, and the time it takes this way appears to take a bit longer. And I mean, I've recently had a student, she's passed now, but she came from elsewhere and she'd been doing all the multi-lane roundabouts, all of this. And this, I think, is quite fitting for what we've been talking about. So she had a test booked. She was a bit worried about the progress she was making. And she came to me and she said, my instructor doesn't know test routes, won't teach test routes, hasn't told me what's coming. And my reply initially was, okay, well, I don't really know test routes and I won't be teaching you test routes. I was like, maybe stick with your instructor. And if you don't feel like you're progressing or you want to try somewhere else, give me a shout. So anyway, she ended up on my diary, spoke about what she'd been doing, big multi-lane roundabouts, fast roads. So I was like, okay, took her for a little drive and she looked terrified. Like she's in a new car with a new person. Let's take it back a little bit and see what she can do.
Yeah.
And one of the comments stands out, her first lesson. She's like, these are weird questions, because I'm asking her how she's feeling coming up to these faster moving roundabouts. She's like, why are you asking me that for? Like, well, it's going to affect what you're about to do. And we ended up going all the way back to clutch control, because her only thought coming up to these big roundabouts, it wasn't looking for the gap. It wasn't how she was going to flow with traffic. It was, I hope I don't stall. And I'm like, well, why do these big roads? Let's get you to the point where you don't even need to think about moving the car off. And that's someone that had a test booked. It was coming rather quick. And she'd just been pushed through a syllabus of some description based, in my opinion, around topics. But either way, she couldn't get the multi-lane roundabouts. She was like, I'd stall in the middle, I'd get panicked, I couldn't see the gap, I couldn't see this. And it was because she didn't have the fundamental skills of setting the car off, stopping the car where she wanted the car stopped. And as an instructor, I almost felt bad taking her back to the beginning. But as a learner, she was so grateful. And I think that comes back to when I asked about value for money. We might see one thing as value for money, but the learners, it's going to be, as long as they progress every lesson, no matter what it is, some kind of progression, they're getting value.
I mean, nobody wants to feel like crap. So that's one of the biggest threats to your business is if your learner goes home feeling like crap. They're going to be the ones that text you the next day and the day before the next lesson or the morning of the next lesson and come up with a bullshit excuse like my dog ate my house key, I can't do my lesson, because they don't want to be there. And that's how you should always look at things, is like, what can you do to change this as the instructor? Pointing that finger of blame outwards is bad. If you point the finger of blame inwards, you're always looking at what you can do and what you can change. Like if you've got a flower that's not growing very well, you don't fix the flower, you fix the environment in which it grows. So it could be the practice area is too hard, or the thing you're working on is too hard, or the level of help's not enough. And it could be that they just don't have the fundamental skills that they need. I went out with someone last year, and this fault was almost like two faults, on repeat. So busy roundabouts is what we were doing. First one, the learner set off really slowly. There was nothing coming from the right, and by the time they got maybe 2 foot out past the giveaway line, you can dual control because now there's a car coming from the right. And the instructor's kind of unhelpful advice was you set off too slowly. You did have enough time, but you didn't go quick enough. So of course, when we got to the next roundabout and he tried to set off quicker, he stalled, and she said, "Oh, you brought your clutch up too fast." Again, not particularly helpful. Then we got to the next roundabout, and because he stalled, he brought his clutch up really slowly, and exactly the same thing happened again. There's no car coming. He set off back, and then he got dual controlled again. And I thought, I can't have this happening again. But in the interest of safety, I need to intervene here and say something. And I said, just talk to me. Tell me what you do with your feet when you're setting off. And he said, well, I bring the clutch up and then I press the gas. And I said to the instructor, do you set off like that? Knowing damn well that they don't. And he said, no, I'm together. So why? And I said to the learner, why are you not using your clutch and the gas at the same time? And he said, oh, I've never done that. So I'm thinking, why the hell are we at fast moving roundabouts if we don't have the skill to set off quickly from fast moving roundabouts? So the next 10 minutes was spent in a car park just off this dual carriageway, trying to help him develop this skill of using the clutch and the gas at the same time. The first attempt was like the start of, like them drag races, like where you've got like smoke and wheels spinning, and it was like that with nightmare. But within 10 minutes, he got it, and he'd never done it before. And we got him doing it two ways, the handbrake way. So your right foot's free to set the gas, find the bite, and use the gas with the clutch. And then we got him even doing it without the handbrake, kind of that balancing act of kind of foot brake, biting point, gas, clutch. And he even managed that as well. He picked it up so fast. And obviously, when we went back to those roundabouts, absolutely fine. And I'm thick, so it takes me a long time to pick things up. And the big thing for me that kind of the moment that kind of the light bulb went off in my head with skills is the only learner I've taught to drive in the last 2 years is my husband. He wanted to learn to drive, and I'd got my electric car, my automatic electric car, in between stopping working with learners and when I taught him to drive. I couldn't believe how good he was at taking gaps at roundabouts after a very short amount of hours. And he was at a roundabout and he'd see a gap and he's gone. And I thought, you've only had like 10 hours. How are you that good at that? And that's when I realized that I'd only ever taught it manually before. And the reason why people weren't setting off and they were missing the chances to go is because they weren't confident in their ability to do the skill of using the pedals. And that's like was a proper eye opener for that for me. Like teaching someone automatic was like, how is he this good at that? But that's why, because he knew that when you press that pedal, we are gone, we're out of here. And when he had that confidence, he was really good. So if you've got learners that are, missing gaps, it could be that they're sort of the classic one is like they're looking for blockers, but they're looking for blockers there, like on the right. So when they've got a car actually blocking the road on the right, then they set off. By the time they set off, the car that was the blocker is all the way down the street, and the car on the right is already coming at you, and you get dual controlled. So it could be that we're not looking early enough for blocking opportunities, potential blockers, that if we set off now, we'll be blocking by the time we get moving. So sometimes it's a forward planning issue, but a lot of the time it's a lack of skill. And it goes back to what we said at the beginning. Why are we in those topic scenarios if we don't have the skills to be in those topic scenarios. And that's why a lot of people fail part 3 in the standards check, because the first thought the examiner would have is you haven't established the learner's needs if you think it's okay to do this here when they clearly have a lack of skill.
Skills makes it so much easier. So much easier. Because when you break it down, like you spoke about there, looking for the gap at the roundabout, there is so much risk associated with that if we don't get it right, if we set off too slow. I'm sure we've all been there as a driving instructor. They've missed their gap, they've missed their gap, they've tried to force their way into something that's now not a gap, and we have to dual control them. And there's a lot of risk there. But if they're still worried about setting off fast, then long straight road, set off, great, stop, go again, go again, go again. You can practice it so many more times in a controlled environment rather than we need to judge the gaps at roundabouts. Like you said, it's going to go wrong. It's high risk. Break down the skill. You can use it everywhere. And then it's no more what you're doing on your part 3 roundabouts. It's like, I'm doing speed control, and we're going to be using junctions, roundabouts, traffic light controls, whatever it is, because we're working on a skill rather than roundabouts. And it makes things so much easier as an instructor, one thing at a time and skills based.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing again that I say until I'm blue in the face, but no one ever seems to listen about. Risk management is not a speech at the beginning of the exam about dual controls. It's about every decision you make. It's about the practice area that you've chosen. It's about the thing that we're working on, and it's your number one job is to manage the risk. So going back to that example that we said, with the learner who's struggling with the T junction, if they're not very good at steering and they take the steering off too early, then they're going to veer towards the curb. If they're not very good at steering and they take the steering off late, then they're going to veer towards the center line. So does it make sense, unless you've got a learner that knows exactly how much steering to put on to do a 90-degree angle, and more importantly, knows when to start bringing it back around to straight again? Why would they be at a T-junction if they didn't have that skill? Because all you're doing there is heightening the one thing that you're there to manage, which is the risk.
And you can practice that kind of steering. I do it, car park. I pretend the car park's a road. There's junctions there, but there's no cars. There's no risk. So we can get that wrong. They can experience it. They can figure it out themselves. And when they've got it, right, should we go and try it on a quiet road? So a few cars, and then we increase the risk that way. Well, we don't increase the risk. We increase the cars in the situation because we want risk at a minimum.
Yeah.
Increase the challenge, did you say?
Yeah.
That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah. So I think looking at that, it's just logic. It's just use logic and just don't get carried away with teaching subjects and topics, and just have a think about what are the skills that are needed before we do that thing. And it's just common sense.
I think it is when you've had it explained, when you are told this is how you do the job and this is what you're going to do. I don't think the ADI 21T helps either. I believe that's a lot of different topics working through.
It's very outdated. It's a complete revamp because it's completely outdated. There is nothing on there at all that's relevant to what we do in instructor training now. Not really. And it's literally we're just filling in the boxes. Just filling in, just that we need to declare the hours, but we didn't spend a certain amount of hours doing that. So, doing those things. That just doesn't make any sense. But yeah, it's one of those things, and I think having a syllabus as well, it sort of helps. The idea is that the learner owns that learning process. And I think that's really important because the key thing with coaching is that we shouldn't be solely responsible for the learning process. So if the learner doesn't know what's next, then they're going to look to you to tell them what's next, and then you've gone back into teacher mode. We need to do this, then we need to do this, then we need to do this. But if the learner has a physical copy of the syllabus and you say to them, so, what do we need to work on today? What's the plan today? And they go, I don't know. You know what they're like. Then you say, well, have a look at your syllabus. Where are we up to? What have we ticked off? What's next? What's the next logical thing to do from this point? Where can we go with these skills to increase the challenge? And it's the same with, when will I be ready for my test? Because if they've got this physical copy of the syllabus, they own it, then the answer is in there. It's not you being the bad guy saying you're not ready. It's, well, have a look at your syllabus. How much have we got to do? How many modules have we not finished? And they go, oh, that one, that one, that one. So when we've done them, do you think you'll be ready for your test? Well, yeah. Do you know what I mean? So you're not being the bad guy going, you're not ready. Because ultimately the syllabus I've made is kind of like it's a list of goals that the learner needs to achieve to be ready for driving in real life. Not about the test, not the minimum standards driving test, which is, what they're all aiming for, but all the skills, knowledge, and understanding that they'll need to be safe drivers forever on our roads. That's the key thing. And because they can own it, your role then becomes as a coach is how can I help you achieve those goals? So it's kind of like the butler approach rather than the headmaster, the authoritarian. It's like, how can I help you learn? How can I help you do that? I can talk you, I could do demonstrations, I can talk you through it, I can prompt you, I can take you to a suitable location. I can give you advice, but how do you want me to help you learn? Should be how we think. But I think there's a lot of old school trainers, and I think there's therefore a lot of old school PDIs that are quoting stuff. It blows my mind. I had someone just yesterday that was talking about fault identification, fault analysis, fault remedy. And I thought, you've been a PDI for 3 months. So how do you know something like that kind of speak from the PST days? So it's obviously their trainer. But that's the problem we have at the moment, because all these wonderful audit trainers that we've got, of which I'm not. I've been, I applied for my audit assessment in September 2022, and I'm still waiting. It's nearly 3 years. But we've got a lot of audit trainers. Audit trainers are the best. You've got to get an audit trainer. But a lot of them are on expired badges because they've not had an audit assessment. So a lot of them that need an update haven't had their update. So they're old school. There are some really good audit trainers, but there's also some really good not audit trainers. But there's also a lot of audit trainers that need an upgrade, and they're teaching old school stuff, which completely flies in the face of the criteria in which their PDIs are going to be assessed on.
I think that challenge is staying for a while. I've requested a standards check and got told to try again in 6 months. So this was a little while ago, and I'm going to be requesting again. When this goes out, I will have requested for a standards check, and I'm not holding my breath really with this, but I've not yet done a standards check, and I want to move into the world of training and audit and down the line. And the first step is a grade A on a standards check.
That was the same with
But
me. I with the trigger system that was brought in, I weren't triggering any of them. So there was no standards check on the horizon, but I had a grade B from 5 years before, and I needed a standards check to go on audit. It's exactly the same as you. It took a year, and this was post-COVID. This was 2021. And it took a year to get one, and it was a nightmare because number one, my PDI, and it was the first time I'd ever took a full license holder. Because of course I've binned off all my learners since I applied for this standards check with great thinking, Nelly. So now I have to take a PDI to my standards check, who I'd never been assessed on teaching a full license holder. And the morning of my standards check to get the PDI, he said, "Oh, I can't come. I've got COVID. Just done a test, positive. Like, well, I'm gonna have to cancel this standards check that I've waited a year for." And I thought, just off just in case, I'll ring the guy that starts at 3 o'clock. Brand new PDI, part two, first ever lesson. Never ever met the guy. And I'm just going to ring him and see if he can start at 12. Come on, I don't know why. Instantly, when the phone was ringing, I was like, put it down. Put it down. I was like, please don't answer. This is a really bad idea. And of course, what did he say? Oh, yeah, it's better for me. I have to pick up my kids, and this means I can pick my kids up, and it's so much easier for me to come at 12 o'clock. I'm like, oh, Christ. So, and that's why I always say this story to people, for people that overplan their exam. Because I got my grade A that I wanted on that day with a stranger that I'd met half an hour before. We did a 20-minute drive. And in that 20-minute drive, I established what his needs were. We then made a plan to work on their needs, and I got a grade A. So you don't need to try and plan this weeks and weeks in advance, because until you know what your learner's needs are, you can't make a plan. But that grade A was so stressful because a B, and you'll experience this when you do it, a B is a fail in your head because then you've not got your A and then you can't apply for audit. But if I've waited 2.5 years for audit, then God knows when yours will be.
First
And
step, standards
we
check.
don't even know if there's going to be an audit by then because they're talking about, not necessarily getting rid of it, but kind of doing something with it, kind of relaunching it. And it might be different. It might be mandatory. It might be scrapped. There's talks ongoing currently about it. But what I want to know is where's my money? Because I gave you my money, DVSA, in 2021, and you've still got my money, and there's no audit assessment. So what's going on?
Well, I mean, without going off on too much of a tangent, it is a little bit frustrating. Not that I'm in the trainer territory yet, but for someone like yourself, the DVSA are still saying find an audit trainer, find an audit registered trainer, use this website. And people who aren't all over social media that haven't found you and other trainers that are maybe not yet registered, they're going on this audit register looking for a local person because that's what the DVSA recommends. Yet they're not allowing people to go onto this register that they're promoting. So it is a tricky situation. I'm not going to complain anymore. I'll request a standards check in the new year or a week before this episode goes out and go and try and get an A. And we'll revisit when, I don't know, when you're preparing for audit, I guess, when they open the doors back up.
Yeah, if there's an audit by then, we don't know.
Yeah, well, exactly. I'm not going to talk about the email reply I got, but it made it seem like they wasn't too sure what the steps were about audit going forward. That's me reading into it. So we can moan, we can complain about the DVSA, and nothing's going to change. So before we move on, I've got some questions from a few of the listeners. Do you mind if we go through them?
Let's do it.
I'm going to be extremely unprofessional now because I need to find them online because that's where they are. So I've got one question. Have you got an update on your plans for the learner doctor?
Well, by the time this goes out, there might have been more things released. I have asked people who are interested in it to tell me, and I'll put their email address in a kind of a mailing list thing that I'm going to send out once I know more. But currently, where are we now? Kind of first week of December. That it's still kind of, it's all up in the air. But the kind of idea with it is I want to kind of form kind of like a hybrid between being on your own and having a franchise. And what I'm looking into, and don't kind of quote me on this because it's kind of up in the air. But
my idea, on record on a podcast.
yeah, it's all right. But the idea is that you get all the benefits of a franchise. So you get call center, you get online diary, you get pupil supply, you get all of that, but you can brand it in your own name, and you have your own branding. You have your own. We'll design the branding for you as well, so you'll get shirts, uniform if you want a uniform or a jacket or a baseball cap. You'll get materials that you can use, and all of it will be your branding. So you get it's the best of both worlds. It's a franchise behind you, a team behind you, um, but it's all under your name. It's all your brand. So you're not driving around in, Lee's driving school. It will be your driving school, that your baby, and we just kind of help you with it. So that's the idea. Um, but yeah, more details will be released as soon as more details are known.
That was from Gary. So there you go, Gary. Get yourself on Lee's mailing list and get the updates. And if nothing's in place by the time this goes out, Lee, we'll edit it out so that no one steals your idea.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So the next question from Stefan. What's your opinion on the recommended number of hours needed to apply for a pink license?
What are your thoughts on it first?
I like that. Well done. I think it depends on the individual, and it's really tricky. So I can only go off my own experience. Before becoming a driving instructor, I was an instructor in the RAF for about 8 years. So I spent 8 years teaching so many different topics, so many different subjects, from how to keep someone alive to how to shoot someone and how to operate weapons, loads of different stuff. So coming into this industry, I had a teaching background and I developed more of a coaching look on it rather than a telling look, because telling didn't work when you've got 30 people in front of you that don't want to be in front of you. Telling them the information that you need to really doesn't work. But when you involve them in the lesson and you get the information from them, it's more engaging and it's a better lesson. So my experience was that for about 8 years. To transfer to this industry, I think I probably could have done less hours with more quality training, if that makes sense.
Yes. So I think how many hours should you need before you're ready to teach people is exactly the same every learner driver asks themselves when they learn to drive. How long's a piece of string? It's as many as you need. And when I did the syllabus that I've done is kind of the part three syllabus, different syllabus. I've done an equivalent for part three to help with train the trainer stuff. So to guide a PDI through how to teach a learner, and what they need. And once you've completed it, then you're ready. You've got all the things you need. You've got the knowledge, understanding, and skill that you need to teach people to drive. So how long does it take to do that? Well, depends on you, doesn't it? Depends on how quick you learn. Depends on me as well. Am I teaching it in the way that you like to learn? If both of those things are in place, then we can get through it in X amount of hours. If you do it in 10 hours less than someone else, then good for you. If you take a bit longer, then that's fine. But it's the same with learning to drive. Once we've got all the knowledge, understanding, and skill that we need to drive, we can go and do the test. So I don't kind of, you see a lot of people talk about how, they kind of poo-poo online training. And there is a lot of national driving schools, which I won't name, but I really want to, that do really shitty online training. And I feel really bad for these people. They receive, bad training online. And then people are going to say, well, online training is rubbish. But I do online training with PDIs when it's better to do it online. And if I'm presenting something to them and kind of developing something new with them that's not a practical in-car skill like pressing the pedals, then they find it beneficial to have it on PowerPoint at home with a cup of tea than being talked at in a car. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's about getting the balance right. Some of part three training should be in the car, and it needs to be. And of course, 10 of the 40 hours that are currently required must be in the car. Um, but I think there's a high quality online training. There's a real place for that. But I think the combination of both, is what you need. But I think if we have, like I said, my PDIs are working towards part three syllabus, so I can't tell them how many hours they'll need to complete it. But once they have, they're ready. They've got everything they need. And when they don't, then they don't.
So do you think this 40 hours for a PDI license is a benefit to our industry or a negative to our industry?
Um, I'm going to say it's a positive for one reason. Because can you imagine the quality of driving instructors on our road if it was less than 40?
That's only for a pink license.
Yeah, but it'd be a nightmare. If there wasn't a limit, if it wasn't a minimum of 40, then it'd be a nightmare. Would I put, have it higher? Then probably, yeah. Um, but how long's a piece of string? Like you said, if it's 40 quality hours, they are going to be more than ready. If it's 20 crappy online hours and 20 rushed hours in the car, they are nowhere near ready. But they've still done 40 hours like the other guy. So I think it's about the quality of the training, not about the number. And it's exactly the same. I'm sure it's exactly the same. You've probably noticed that with learners, where you'll get a learner who says, "Oh, I've done 10 hours," and you're thinking, "Christ, here we go." And you get someone else that said, "Oh, I've had 40 hours." And the one that's done 10 hours is brilliant. The one that's done 40 hours can't even do clutch control. And your mindset was like, oh, they'll be good and they're going to be really close to the beginning. But if they've had 10 quality hours, that's better than 40 rubbish hours, isn't it? So it's exactly the same. Yeah, I think we need to, as an industry, up our standards. Everything is minimum standards. The driving test is minimum standards. Part three is minimum standards. And it's hard to say that for people that I work with. 80% of my business is people that have failed part three twice. It's really hard to say to them that this is a really low bar, but it is. There's certain things you need to do on your part three to demonstrate competence, and you need to do them most of the time and get a 2 grade, and then you pass, and then hopefully you'll develop. But standards check is, and you'll notice this when you do your standards check. It's probably the difference between part three and standard check is it's like the difference between a driving test and a part two exam. So they're both driving tests. One of them is if you're safe and do the basics, you'll pass. That's part three and driving test. And then part two and standards check is like we expect you to be good because you've got skin in the game. We expect to see quality because you're an ADI. So that it's kind of marked a little bit more, not harshly, but they expect more of you.
Let's hope I'm in a good position when I get one in the new year. I mean, I'm quite fortunate with the podcast that I get to talk to so many of you guys, and I'd like to think I'm better now than I was 4 years ago. I've just had my email through that I need to renew my badge, so it's 3.5 years since I
Me too.
qualified.
Me too.
So
I've really got my CRB. Is it CRB or DBS or neither? It's been called different things over the years, but that check thing you got to do. I literally got that through the post today, so I can now apply for my. I don't even know. Hang on, 2008, 2013, 2017, 2021. Yeah, the fifth one, my fifth one.
we're not here to do maths, eh? But you've done well counting in fours then.
I know. Considering I'm thick, I did pretty well there.
You did all right. So we've not answered Stefan's question about the minimum hours, but I think you've given a very good answer in it depends on the quality of
Yeah.
the training. And I think my opinion on it, because you asked me, was it depends on the individual and their background as well. Often people come into this, and I think it's relevant to people listening. I've spent 20 years driving. I can be a driving instructor, and it's a completely different skill set. Being a driver is one thing, being coach, teacher, instructor, whatever you want to term it as, completely different. So get as many hours as you can of good quality training, I think is a good message.
Definitely. Very important message as well.
So before you disappear, Lee, what have you got coming up? What messages would you like to share with people?
Well, we kind of talked about is it driver doctor or learner doctor? I can't remember. Learner doctor. Yeah. So I've got that coming up. That's a national driving school franchise option that is going to be open to PDIs and ADIs in the future, in the new year, which is what we are now apparently in the future. But yeah, until then, I'm delivering courses for PDIs and ADIs in three different ways. You can do them online, one to one. You can do them on a workshop via PDI ADI. That's a small group workshop. So I run my courses monthly on pdiadi.com. Or you can buy video training for instant access of all my courses if you don't want to wait. So you can find that at adidoctor.co.uk or pdidoctor.co.uk. I'm on social media as well. So if you want to chat, let's have a chat.
Great. I will get all of the links in the description as well from you before this goes live in the new year. So people can either reach out as a PDI or they can start their 2025 CPD with the PDI ADI doctor. Lee, thank you very much. It's been great chatting with you tonight.
It's been lovely, Josh. Thanks for having me on again.
It was great. Thank you.